Hello, welcome to another episode of VMware Bits and Bytes Live. I'm Nigel Stephenson, look after market development for EMEA for our telco business unit here at VMware. And today we're going to take another deep dive into the world of the ecosystem. Now, we've had a number of these episodes where we've spoken to technology vendors as technology partners in building the ecosystem around the disaggregation of telco and telecoms environments. And today I want to look at another part of the ecosystem, which is the GSIs, the systems integration side, which is obviously becoming increasingly important as we move to more flexible, but by necessity also more complex environments. So back in February, we announced a collaboration with NTT DATA, specifically on this topic of migrating more towards the cloud-native environment. And I'm very pleased that we have Stavros Markogiannakis from NTT DATA here with us. Marcus is Senior Director, Technical Solutions Architecture within the Telco and Media Group at NTT DATA, and also Lorcan joining us again, Director of RAN for, global, in fact, within VMware. So we can explore a little bit more about what the GSI, the systems integration piece, involves and what it can do to help customers, CSPs in particular, move forward. So with that said, I'm going to start with you, Lorcan. What I'd like to do is do a little bit of retrospective, if you like, because it's now been many years since the disaggregation of telecoms networks started, and we've actually made a lot of progress. So before we look at what we need to do to go forward, let's have a quick look at where we've got to. So where would you see the sort of successes that we've seen within the CSP community as they've moved largely, I guess, as their own systems integrators, but as they've moved towards our current stage of having deployed a lot of VNF environments and starting to look at cloud native? What are the successes? What have you seen that encourages you?
So yeah, I guess, we've got over the last number of years, we've ended up with over nearly 150 different customers using over 300 different network functions, whether virtualized or containerized, deployed across many millions of virtual machines and containerized infrastructure. Then starting at adding a lot of service assurance to that, and then adding a lot of automation to that. And that's, I think, particularly the virtualized network function, the VNF world has been pretty strong at taking over what was the physical network world. So we've taken a lot of what were very purpose-built appliances and maybe repeated a lot of that, some of that very similar operational processes, very similar deployment methods. But as we move towards that more cloud-native world, those applications are becoming more microservices oriented. We've got some very early deployments of those, particularly the core network 5G functions being deployed, and some of the ancillary network functions around that, and then driving a more continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous test approach towards getting those network functions deployed and aggregated. And that's in IT, in the core, and in the RAN parts of the network. So large scale deployments of all those types of technology, fully cloud native, and then starting to evolve towards a more automated and service assurance driven approach, I think.
So Stavros, is that where you see the challenges going forward? Is it that we've been progressing nicely towards virtualized environments, but arguably in a relatively static way, whereas now we're going towards more of a true cloud native, and that's bringing in different technical requirements, different processes? Is that where you see the challenge?
Yes, certainly, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm glad to be on the show. What we certainly see is that yes, a lot of achievement has already been established amongst the global operators community. We've seen a lot of functions being virtualized, but I think it's worth understanding where we are in that process, because as we transition from a VNF world to a sort of cloud native CNF world, we definitely see a need to really considerably up the ante in the automation space. So basically, what has happened in the original NFVI deployment that we've seen is a lot of the sort of legacy network planning practices in managing, maintaining that infrastructure have really been the sort of starting approach in many operators. So we've seen a lot of workloads have been manually being provisioned, a lot of configuration still managed fairly manually, which results in drift. We're still seeing today, despite the progress, the occasional major incident where an entire data center is brought down because of a misconfiguration issue in the network. A lot of spreadsheets are still, used to manage the infrastructure. And certainly, when you look at the operations lifecycle management for various tasks, a lot of manual intervention has been the norm. We've seen automation. I think it's unfair to say that we've not seen automation, but we've seen a lot of task-based automation. And I think now we need to start moving towards an end-to-end business process automation, stitching together a number of different automation tasks and building on some of the successes. Certainly, the integration complexity has been underestimated when the journey started. And we're also seeing that the most of the progress is definitely on the operators have been on the leading edge. It started 7 years plus ago. And being at the leading edge, it does mean that, they're failing fast in an expensive way. The benefits are there today, but it's not being an easy journey. And I think the standard PNF type model where operators had a thin governance layer to manage, what was a black box solution, simply isn't adequate or hasn't been adequate, and especially with the added complexity that cloud native brings. I think the importance of a trusted partner with strong integration and infrastructure expertise is a key ingredient for the path forward. Absolutely.
Okay, great, excellent. So we'll come back to you on that, because you mentioned a lot there about the change in the way we have to look at organizing and organizing processes around building out new technology. Coming back to Lorcan, on sticking with the technology side of it, what do you think are the key technologies that need to be part of this move, if you like, from IaaS to CaaS? What does the technology? What technologies are people going to have to get their processes around, if you like? And then I'll come back to Stavros and ask a little bit about how we could potentially, as a community, help customers do that in a process way.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Nigel, in terms of from a technology perspective. As you're moving from that infrastructure as a service, which a lot of the time you were just replicating physical network functions and planning processes, and moving towards more containerized, particularly as the applications themselves move from being fairly monolithic towards those microservices architecture. The ability to think about how you're using those CI/CD tools, come up with some continuous test frameworks for how you actually deploy and manage dependencies for different components, and then leveraging that into your service creation environment, if you like, or just how you think about building new services. A lot of people talk about network slicing. I mean, if I look at network slicing, really, I need to extend my quality of service out to the radio network. I need to be able to allocate resources in the radio plane. I need to be able to service and bring that knowledge all the way through to core to billing and customer care. That's not really a single technology, but it starts to move towards having fairly consistent thinking around APIs from your billing systems all the way through to your operations systems, service assurance, all the way down to the actual deployment of functions in the network. So quite a lot of things to manage and do dependency management through. And then you underneath that, particularly on the core network side, you see people talking about different automation frameworks, whether it's open source or the more Etsy Mano type approaches that we've seen adopted over the last couple of years, really how do you come up with consistent ways of describing what you have in the network, the inventory of that, and then how do you automate and deploy on top of a consistent framework. So I think a lot of work that certainly Stavros has extensive experience of doing over the last number of years. How do you really automate these types of frameworks?
So we've got, from a technology perspective, we've got the ability to potentially do things like data models. We've got the potential to do things like automation, orchestration, that which is still being built, right? Still a work in progress. Those things are still developing as we speak, kind of thing. The inclusion of AI, I've got to mention AI nowadays, and then
exactly. I mean, it's classically we end up with a lot of data and coming from lots of different places, right? And we need to start thinking about consistent data models for how we handle that data. Then we need to automate on top of that, which starts to get to, how do I train machines to use that data? Then how do I automate that? What sort of intelligence do I use in that? And all of a sudden you're back in that artificial-ish intelligence world. So that there's an inevitability in that, but we need a fairly stepwise approach for how that's done and controlled. Right? There's a lot of learning to be done before that.
Sure. So we can introduce technologies that in principle enable this next phase, but the very nature of cloud native and the very nature of the technologies that we need to have collaborating with themselves, really, that is where we need to have the processes in place and the strategies in order to capitalize and manage this very different environment, which I guess, coming back to you, Stavros, is where I know you have frameworks around CI/CD, CT type frameworks and so on. It's that process element that is starting to come to the fore from a systems integration perspective. Is that how you would see it?
Yeah, I mean, the NTT DATA is a global systems integrator, and we've been extensively developing IT and enterprise applications, using a continuous integration, continuous delivery. The key differentiator for us is our DNA, which is in the telco space. So we are a telecommunications company. We are part of a very large group. We are fortunate to work alongside in our group one of the leading mobile operators globally with 80 million plus subscribers. I think that in itself gives us a level of collaboration and insight and foresight, particularly around application performance, application onboarding challenges, and how we can address them. Obviously outside Japan for our European and outside Japan operator community. So it is important to really have that strong understanding of IT and enterprise application development when you are doing continuous integration, continuous delivery, and how you take the practice and learnings and apply that to how you manage your infrastructure. Because now, in the same way that DevOps was to agile software development in terms of being complementary, now what we're seeing with the proliferation of Kubernetes particularly, we see a move towards GitOps, which is effectively GitOps is to DevOps what DevOps is to agile software development. But the interesting dimension is that you apply an approach where you consolidate the lifecycle management of your infrastructure with the lifecycle management of your applications into effectively one automated process. This is quite key. But also, I have to say a few words around the coexistence management, because, cloud native is not a panacea of how things should be developed, because we have to recognize that certain applications, particularly when you look at the traditional OC layer, from the transport layer and below, your traditional switching routine, firewalling, functionality, they may not necessarily tick all the 12 properties of the 12-factor properties that make up sort of what definition of what is a cloud-native microservice type application. So you may get to the point where you actually have some applications which are cloud-native enough, but not necessarily tick all the 12 boxes, which actually means that you also have to manage a coexistence as in ancillary services with your more cloud native, the ones that are really ticking all the boxes. That coexistence management is very important, because what you really need to do is, before you get to the point of start deploying cloud native functions at scale, you need to go and investigate, within the operator community, where they are in their journey, how optimized their current setup is. We have an extensive FinOps practice in NTT DATA FinOps is kind of synonymous with the cloud cost optimization, but what we're doing is we're extending that to have a FinOps on-prem capability, where we start looking at how your workloads are placed, how they are optimized, how we can leverage more intelligence and automation with how you can place them in a kind of in a better packed way to drive not only efficiencies with how you can accommodate incremental loads on top, but also how you are driving better energy efficiency underneath. So we are working closely with VMware and the extensive area operations team to offer a complete FinOps on-prem capability to really go there and optimize the initial setup and then start looking at scaling up, looking at how you can combine CNFs and VNFs together and really abstract them through network services, because I think we've seen very little network service definitions in the core space. And I think that kind of contributes considerably to lack of extensive service assurance solutions, particularly in the MNO space. But as they are transitioning to B2B models and they look more aching towards the fixed operator space, where they've been selling fixed B2B services at the wholesale level, we see now with the 5G standalone new use cases, new business model, more B2B services that need to be assured end to end. And I think we're seeing the importance of really managing things at the network service level. So you manage eventually your underlying infrastructure and function lifecycle management through the network services lifecycle management. And that's certainly where we see the direction going. But back to the background in DevOps, when applying, what I wanted to say is that when you're looking at enterprise application development, you say I'm going to develop it in a CI/CD way. Now we need to really leverage this knowledge and apply it on infrastructure and really start consolidating our infrastructure to more of an infrastructure as a code model, where we treat our infrastructure as code, where we apply fundamental principles such as source code management. Without this, a CI process isn't really a CI process. How we apply source code management, how we have a source of truth that we can maintain and really avoid configuration drift, ensure compliance. All these attributes are particularly important, for which NTT DATA has a wealth of expertise to really offer to our clients peace of mind. When you're looking at holistically getting them through the journey of cloud native, beyond the technology adoption, but also an organizational transformation, which I think is extremely important.
Exactly. I mean, that's what a lot of it's about, right? There's a lot of value to add there around the technology in terms of organization, around process management, establishment of process, and so on and so forth. So lots and lots of areas to cover there. And I'm sure, if folks listening, if they look out over the coming weeks and months, they'll see more details of the outcomes in terms of services and so on that are going to come from this collaboration between VMware and NTT DATA. One final thought, if I may, just to throw out there: how do you see these challenges, if at all? How do you see the advent of Open RAN impacting this? Is this just another part of the process? Does it help drive the process? Open question to either of you, if you have any views as to how the advent of Open RAN or the evolution towards Open RAN might impact this conversation.
How Lorcan, you can go first. I can go first. I have no.
So you go.
Yeah, so I could start, and maybe Stavros, you can speak a little bit about what we're doing together with the OREX environments. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can view a base station location as it's a data center, right? So it's becoming modernized. We're putting more compute nodes in there. It already has a lot of infrastructure components in there. We can consolidate those onto the same platform, and we're running CI/CD in large scale already with customers in the US, right? So we are 70,000 sites worth of CI/CD running releases out. So really, you look at the scale of the NTT networks in Japan, 300,000-400,000 macro sites, taking that learning on release management and pushing it into the rest of the world. I think there's some serious acceleration we could do with Open RAN technologies. I think, Stavros, anything on the kind of OREX thinking, or?
Yes, the whole idea of the Open RAN ecosystem experience that we're both active members is obviously to really simplify the system integration landscape, to really come up with working combinations and solutions that are proven at a large scale, to be used in the market. I think the Open RAN angle is for me very important because it's really the next major leap in SDN and NFV adoption. As we've seen the first leap, if I may say, being on the core side of the network, I think it will be extremely important to leverage the learnings of the initial SDN and NFV adoption in the core space and really look at how you can apply these learnings and avoid certain mistakes, particularly around the sort of management and orchestration space that we've seen, in some cases, that global operations landscape. It is important, again, the coexistence, because the brownfield ecosystem, from an operator perspective, has unique challenges, and it's very important that whilst Open RAN may take a while to achieve a large-scale adoption, I think it's not to say that some of the principles around the consolidated management plane that can be used to really look at the evolved CSON functionality and a consolidated multi-vendor FCAPS functionality, I think that's very likely to proliferate considerably first. And I think, this sort of end-to-end orchestration functionality and automation extended at multiples of volumes from the core space will be a very important ingredient for the success and adoption of when the volume deployment starts. I think that's pretty much, the angle is in a very exciting space. With a lot of learnings that we can take from our experience being really, we have extensive experience in system integration in the core space, and obviously VMware, very strong, mature technology in that space that pretty much works. So I think there's a lot of learnings for the customers to leverage when they look at Open RAN and the stage to get to the full scale Open RAN deployment.
Yeah, excellent. Well, look, we'll leave it there. I'd say thanks again for joining us. An interesting conversation. As I say, I look forward to seeing more details of solutions and services that are going to come out through this collaboration, and obviously those will be publicly available over the weeks and months to come. But for now, Lorcan, Stavros, folks watching, thank you very much indeed, and we'll see you on the next edition of Bits and Bytes Live. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.